Russia wants Pokrovsk to sell Donbass victory and pressure the West, Zelensky says. Zelensky said Russia seeks to seize Pokrovsk to bolster its claim of taking Donbass and pressure the West to push Ukraine into concessions. President Volodymyr Zelensky warned on Friday, November 7th, that Russia's intensified assault on Pokrovsk is aimed not only at battlefield gains, but at shaping a political narrative designed to pressure Western partners into forcing Ukraine to surrender Donbass. Speaking at a briefing in Kyiv attended by Kyiv Post, Zelensky said Moscow needs to seize the city, to promote the narrative that they can allegedly take Donbass, and to call on Western countries to force Ukraine to give Donbass to Russia. The president said he believes Russia is using the situation around Pokrovsk to influence international decision-making, particularly sanctions policy. It can affect the push for sanctions or the delay of sanctions, he said. Russia is very afraid of strong U.S. decisions, and with this story about Pokrovsk, they want to show success on the battlefield. According to Zelensky, Russia's top priority is to capture Pokrovsk as quickly as possible. He said Ukrainian forces repelled 220 assaults on the city in just 3 days, underscoring the intensity of the fighting. On November 5th, Russian troops attempted to storm the city using armored vehicles, but suffered losses and lost equipment, Zelensky said. Ukrainian military data indicate that 314 Russian soldiers remain inside the city. Fierce fighting continues around Pokrovsk as of Friday, where Ukrainian special forces and intelligence units are battling a major Russian assault. Both sides have claimed gains in recent days, but Kyiv says Russian troops are suffering heavy losses. Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky said Monday that Ukrainian forces are intensifying pressure on Russian positions near Dobropilya to disrupt Moscow's offensive. Zelensky also reported that Russian forces suffered 25,000 confirmed personnel losses in October due to Ukrainian drones, the highest monthly toll since the start of the full-scale invasion. The president said an additional 2,000 to 3,000 enemy casualties lack video confirmation, but are considered likely. This shows that we are increasing the number of drones on the front line, he added. Accordingly, the enemy is taking greater losses. The situation in Pokrovsk is critical. As Russian forces advance into the city at a staggering cost, the strategic hinge of Western Donetsk is becoming a meat grinder. In this Kyiv Post interview, former U.S. Navy SEAL Chuck Farrer gives Jason Smart his brutal assessment about this battle. Russia is gaining ground. But at what price? It is a price too high for Russia to bear. The discussion focuses on the unsustainable losses in Russian vehicles and personnel and the hard choices Ukraine now faces. Farrer assesses why Russia, previously, was willing to pay in blood for Pokrovsk, its rail links, road hubs, and strategic value, and how Ukrainian drone warfare and counter-battery fire are exacting a massive toll for every street. Moreover, now that the city has been largely destroyed, what does Russia really gain? Farrer also examines the Russian tactics, the stress on Ukrainian air defense, and the operational tempo of these high-loss assaults. This is not a victory, but a brutal battle of attrition. Beyond the front, European enforcement on Russia's shadow fleet and the tightening of financial channels raise friction and cost for the Kremlin's war machine, aligning pressure at sea and on land. This analysis connects the tactical fight for Pokrovsk to the broader strategic and economic war. Viewers will get a clear-eyed read on the high-cost, low-gain nature of Russia's advance, how Ukrainian tactics are adapting under pressure, and the strategic implications of this fight for the rest of the Donbass. This is an evidence-driven briefing for those who want facts, not headlines, to get the truth of what is now transpiring in eastern Ukraine. Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, a turning point for Russia or last-minute panic before winter? Fields, villages, connecting roads. From Russia's perspective, the war in 2025 has been a fiasco so far, with successes measured in acres. But now, in the final stages of this year, just before winter sets in, there are reports of Russian advances into the city of Pokrovsk and similar reports from the city of Kupiansk. Is this a Russian breakthrough? Has the tide turned? Or is what is currently happening more likely to be the culmination of Russian efforts to conquer at least something this year, as Ukrainian analyst Mykola Bieliskov of the National Institute for Strategic Studies puts it? One thing is certain, Russia has massively intensified its attacks in central Donbass in recent months. According to President Volodymyr Zelensky, the Russian army currently has around 170,000 troops on the front line around Pokrovsk alone. Belyskov speaks of a 1:10 balance of power in some sections of the front. But one thing is clear to him. What is currently happening is not a turning point in Russia's favor. After all, there is the price Russia is paying for what are ultimately relatively small territorial gains. In the past 3 months, Russian losses have been just under 30,000 men per month. This includes soldiers killed or wounded beyond combat capability. And 30,000 men is also the limit of human reinforcements that Russia is currently able to muster, according to current figures. The life expectancy of Russian contract soldiers, and Russia is currently only deploying such soldiers, as there is no mobilization, remains at around 1 month. In any case, the current situation in Pokrovsk and Kupiansk has developed over months. In Kupiansk, it was a slow, steady Russian advance with heavy losses. In Pokrovsk, on the other hand, one could get the impression that Ukrainian units were taken by surprise. Mykola Belyskov does not share this impression. Yet, he does identify mistakes on the Ukrainian side, particularly in the chain of command and reporting. Developments were downplayed, he says, and the region only received full attention once Russia had already massively gathered and deployed troops. Advertisement. Pokrovsk, a small city that once had a population of 60,000, has been on Russia's priority list for more than a year. The town is strategically important. Important transport routes pass through Pokrovsk. The city was also an important logistics hub. Pokrovsk also flanks the 2 larger cities further north in the region, Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. If Pokrovsk were to fall, capabilities would be freed up for an offensive on these 2 cities. At least, that is the theory on paper. According to Daniel Mayalai of the Institute for the Study of War, there is one main reason why Russia is currently relying primarily on infantry and using armored vehicles only sparingly or selectively: the challenge of procuring such vehicles and the mass deployment of drones. Tanks are a target, and when mechanized attacks do occur, they involve dozens of tanks at once, especially in bad weather, because that interferes with reconnaissance. Advertisement. According to Belyskov, Russia's offensive actions are currently based primarily on lightly armed, barefoot infantry. This slows down every troop movement, but it also sets the pace when it comes to supplies and the entire logistics. They cannot change direction so quickly, and it is still dozens of kilometers to Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. He therefore classifies what is currently happening as follows. They are creating the starting point for the coming year of war. Drone watershed. The year 2025, which is coming to an end, certainly has what it takes to go down in history as historic. Drones, sensor surveillance, remote-controlled and autonomous systems now dominate the battlefield. This is no longer the battlefield of 2022, says Belyskov. Back then, it was all about artillery. Artillery has a precisely defined range and, at the same time, a delay in target planning. The widespread use of FPV drones means that attacks can be carried out with precision in real time. This has fundamentally changed the nature of warfare. Whereas the no-man's land between the front lines in the First World War was perhaps a few hundred meters wide, today it is 15 to 20 kilometers on both sides, says Mykola Belyskov. Meanwhile, the Russians hardly use tanks or heavy equipment anymore. They are too easy a target. Large offensives by the Russian infantry have recently been carried out under the protection of aluminum blankets to avoid thermal sensors. Given the technological means employed and the resulting conditions for troops in a no-man's land dozens of kilometers wide, a collapse of the front line is not in sight. But has this developed into something of a high-tech stalemate? Belyskov says, ask a frontline soldier about this. He will definitely say no. Multidimensional warfare. But that's not all. Kinetic warfare is only one dimension of this war, which is being fought on many levels, and not only in Ukraine, but also in Western Europe. The war is being fought on a political, informational, and psychological level, but also through sabotage, diversion, and propaganda in all its forms. And these are ultimately decisive in a war of attrition like this one. Even the First World War did not end with a breakthrough on the front. says Bieliskov, but with the collapse of systems and states. And while Bieliskov views the events on the war front rather calmly as a last-minute Russian panic before winter, he is much more concerned about the political front. Recently, financial contributions from NATO countries to Ukraine have fallen sharply, even though NATO had only just agreed on a procurement and financing mechanism, PEARL, in July. Ukraine needs $16 to $18 billion per year, but since July, i.e. after about a third of the year, only $3 billion have been paid into the pot. However, according to Bieliskov, what is lacking is political leadership and the ability of politicians to explain the urgency of the situation. What threatens is fatigue, the deceptive impression that Ukraine will somehow sort things out and that Western Europe is not directly affected anyway. Wishful thinking until it is too late to react. Pokrovsk becomes epicenter of Ukraine's fiercest battles yet. Ukrainian special forces and intelligence units battle fierce Russian assaults in Pokrovsk. Kiev intensifies counterattacks near Dobropilya, reporting heavy Russian losses amid urban chaos. Fierce fighting continues in Pokrovsk as Ukrainian special forces and intelligence units resist a massive Russian push. Amid chaos and urban combat, both sides have claimed gains, while Kiev has reported heavy Russian losses. Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, AFU, Oleksandr Syrskyi said on Monday evening, November 3, that Ukrainian forces are intensifying pressure on the Dobropilya salient, preventing Russian troops from concentrating their main efforts in the Pokrovsk area. I continue to work in the Donetsk region, particularly in the area of responsibility of the 7th Rapid Reaction Corps of the AFU, Syrskyi wrote on Facebook. He said he had received reports from local commanders on the situation and their urgent needs. We are increasing pressure on the Dobropilya salient. We continue to liberate and clear territories, which forces the enemy to disperse its forces and prevents it from concentrating its main efforts in the Pokrovsk area, Syrskyi stated. According to him, assault units in the Dobropilya salient have advanced in several directions over the past day. In total, 188 square kilometers, 73 square miles, were liberated during the operation, and 248.7 square kilometers, 96 square miles, were cleared of enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups, he added, noting that Ukrainian forces are being reinforced with additional personnel, weapons, equipment, and unmanned systems. During a press meeting on Monday, President Volodymyr Zelensky said he was unaware of any special operation by Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, HUR, in Pokrovsk, despite reports circulating over the weekend. Advertisement. I do not know about the HUR special operation, to be honest, Zelensky said. We have special forces that the General Staff and the Armed Forces use in different operations. HUR personnel help the Armed Forces. There may have been up to 30 people there. The president added that Russia has amassed around 170,000 troops in the Pokrovsk area and is attempting to deploy additional forces there. On Tuesday morning, November 4th, HUR confirmed that its Timur special unit continues operating in one of Pokrovsk's key areas for frontline logistics. Fierce battles are taking place with the Russian occupiers. After a successful landing operation, the HUR special forces, who occupied the designated lines, broke through the ground corridor and were joined by additional special forces, the statement reads. The photo accompanying the statement also features Kirilo Budanov, head of HUR. According to the intelligence agency, combat operations are ongoing to disrupt Russia's attempts to expand its fire control over logistics routes in the area of HUR responsibility. Combat missions in the sector are also being carried out by other special units of the HUR. However, for the safety of the personnel involved, the details of these operations are not being disclosed at this time. Coordinated work is ongoing with all components of Ukraine's security and defense forces, the report adds. In addition, HUR released a video more than 2.5 minutes long, showing footage of combat operations by fighters from the Timur Special Unit in the city, where drone footage shows intense fighting and a devastated urban landscape. Kiev Post was unable to independently verify the time and location of the video. Armed Forces of Ukraine, AFU, Major and political scientist Andriy Kachuk told Radio NV on Tuesday that Russian units infiltrating Pokrovsk are engaging in firefights with Ukrainian drone operator teams. This indicates that they are present across a large area of the city. But what's important is that they are not concentrated throughout the entire city, Kachuk said. The Russians are constantly moving, as are our fighters. There's such chaos there that it works for both sides. Russian troops can occupy one building for several hours and then move to another, he added. According to him, Russian forces have taken positions on the southern outskirts of the city, deploying their UAV operators to strike Ukrainian defense positions. Ukraine, in turn, is attempting to respond symmetrically. At the same time, Kachuk revealed that thanks to recent operations by HUR and other special forces supporting the Ukrainian military last week, Ukraine achieved several tactical successes. However, there have been no changes at the operational or strategic level. But the situation north of Pokrovsk, the fact that Rodinsk is currently not under Russian control and that they're being held back there, gives us an opportunity. The city is not in full encirclement, which allows for certain maneuvering, defensive, and counterattack actions within the city itself, he told Radio NV. Russian forces appear to be operating with increasing confidence within the city, according to a Monday, November 3rd report by the Institute for the Study of War, ISW. Geolocated footage published that day indicates Russian troops have advanced in southern Myrnohrad, east of Pokrovsk, and eastern Rodinsk, north of Pokrovsk. A Ukrainian officer reported that Russian forces are pushing farther into Pokrovsk, trying to set up observation posts and concentrate personnel in the town. The officer added that Russian troops are attempting to establish defensive positions in unspecified areas. A source linked to Ukrainian military intelligence said Russian troops are now creating forward observation posts and drone operator positions as they settle into Pokrovsk. Russian military bloggers claimed on November 2nd to 3rd that Russian soldiers are checking civilians' documents in the city. At the same time, Ukrainian forces continue defensive operations and counterattacks in the Pokrovsk direction. Geolocated footage from November 3rd suggests Ukrainian troops advanced in eastern Rodinsk, where Russian sources had previously claimed control. Ukraine's 7th Rapid Reaction Corps of the Air Assault Forces said in a Facebook statement its troops created opportunities to resupply and reinforce units in the Pokrovsk direction, preventing further Russian advances in northern Pokrovsk and stopping them from cutting the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad highway. ISW also reported that Ukrainian forces liberated parts of the Russian penetration near Dobrapilya on Pokrovsk's eastern flank. A Russian mill blogger claimed Ukrainian troops recaptured Novshakov, east of Dobrapilya, suggesting Russian forces no longer hold territory north of Kuchervyar. According to ISW, Ukraine's counteroffensive actions near Dobrapilya are likely complicating Russian attempts to encircle Ukrainian positions around Pokrovsk. As per the previous Kiev Post report, fighters from Ukraine's Omega Special Forces Center of the National Guard said that Russian troops are suffering gigantic losses as they attempt to seize the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad area. The unit shared photos showing dozens of burned and dismembered bodies of Russian soldiers. According to the National Guard, almost all of them were eliminated by drones, as Russian forces continue assaulting Ukrainian positions simply with meat, without any coherent tactics or strategy. When you see the enemy's advancement on the maps, know what price the occupier pays for every square meter of Ukrainian land, the National Guard added, tacitly acknowledging Russian advances while emphasizing the heavy losses Moscow has incurred. Russian forces are reportedly storing the bodies of soldiers killed near Pokrovsk in a meat processing plant, according to the Atesh partisan movement. The decision was allegedly made due to an unprecedented influx of dead from Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad, as the Russian morgue and logistics system is completely paralyzed. Kiev Post cannot independently verify the report. In August 2024, Zelensky reported that after the failure of Russia's Kharkiv operation, Pokrovsk had become the Kremlin's main target. Even then, Moscow concentrated its largest number of forces and resources on capturing the city. By November 2024, around 40% of Pokrovsk had already been cut off from power due to constant strikes, and roughly 70% of residential buildings had been destroyed. For more than a year, the Russian army has attempted to advance toward the city. In August 2025, Zelensky said that Russia had amassed its largest troop grouping in the Pokrovsk direction, about 100,000 soldiers. On October 16th, Ukraine's general staff reported that stabilization measures were underway in Pokrovsk, which effectively confirmed that Russian forces had penetrated the city. The following day, Ukraine's airborne assault troops reported that Russian soldiers were shooting civilians in Pokrovsk. By the end of October, according to the paratroopers, urban combat was taking place within the city, while Russian forces maintained fire control over key logistical routes. As a result, the delivery of food, ammunition, and reinforcements, as well as the withdrawal of troops, became extremely difficult. On October 30th, Zelensky said that while Russian drones were controlling logistics routes, Ukraine's defense forces were doing the same. Around that time, AFU's chief Syrskyi and head of the HUR Kirilo Budanov arrived to reinforce Ukrainian positions in the Pokrovsk area.